Mob attacks are becoming a regular occurrence in South Africa. Today, angry Orlando East residents armed with sjamboks and sticks demanded justice for murdered 6-year-old Amantle Samane at their local police station. In many instances, community members take the law into their own hands. Let's look at this now, and I'm joined for this conversation by Annah Moyo-Kupeta, Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. Anna, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. Without trying to or appearing to be justifying it, but is it not fair to say that mob justice finds fertile ground where communities find or feel let down by those who are supposed to protect them?
You are right, and we really need to understand what drives communities to take the law into their own hands before we even start labeling them as criminals and arresting them. Some of these issues, particularly issues of criminality, particularly such gruesome crimes like the one that we see in Orlando, where a young girl, a 6-year-old girl, was raped and killed by a grown man. It's really a gruesome way of ending a child's life. Our condolences and our hearts go to Amantle's family about this case. But this really points to a much deeper problem in the community. In most instances, this happens when community members would have relied on the criminal justice system to bring perpetrators to book. But we see a failure in the criminal justice system in actually doing so. So where there is lack of trust in the criminal justice system, when there is lack of confidence that the criminal justice system will deliver the kind of justice that community members are expecting, we tend to then see community members taking the law into their own hands. I think what really becomes unfortunate about this situation is that communities on the one hand are frustrated, they are angry, they are really let down by the very system that ought to protect, that is tasked with protecting them. But on the other hand, the caveat is that we see normally law-abiding citizens becoming criminals overnight in the event that they commit crimes as they put the law into their own hands using such tactics, for instance, where they are carrying weapons and where they meet, for instance, someone who looks like a victim but may not be a victim, they would have targeted or even beaten up or sometimes even killed someone who is not the suspect or who would not have committed the crime that the community is actually lamenting.
And there is nothing wrong in communities relying on the criminal justice system, you know. And I'm asking, or I'm raising this because there are times when it's made or it's being made to feel like, you know, people are wrong to do that. That's what law enforcement agencies are there to do. In as much as communities do have a responsibility to, you know, out criminals who live among those communities, to report matters to the police. But that doesn't take away the responsibility of law enforcement agencies and the entire criminal justice system from doing what it is supposed to do by law.
Indeed, they have a responsibility and a duty to ensure law and order in communities, to ensure that those who are perpetrators and suspects of criminality are arrested and go through the whole criminal justice system up to the point where they are prosecuted and they're incarcerated. But sometimes there are issues where you see some of the people who would have committed crime in the community going out, for instance, during the criminal justice system processes. Some of them either are out on bail, some of them they are failed by the very same criminal justice system. When you hear of cases where the docket is lost and the case cannot continue. So sometimes some of these bottlenecks and some of these challenges with the criminal justice system are part of what drives community members to take the law into their own hands. So we really need to look at some of these drivers and some of these triggers and fuelers in order to understand why your normally law-abiding citizens would end up taking the law into their own hands. It really means that there are gaps somewhere, particularly in the criminal justice system.
Now, there are statistics or reports that suggest that at least 2 people die a day as a result of vigilante or group attacks in the country. Would you say, from what you know, is this phenomenon, mob violence, out of control or getting there?
It is something that is getting out of control. When you look at the fact that some of the people who get killed as part of vigilantism or mob justice killing, sometimes it's literally bystanders or people who are suspected because they are wearing something similar to what a suspect was wearing, or someone who looks like, I think the case in Orlando is a good case in point, where community members had apprehended previously someone who looked like the perpetrator, but this was not the perpetrator. So sometimes if things get out of hand, and the challenge as well with mob justice is the fact that there is no control, there are no parameters, there are no rules, and there are no procedures to be followed. Basically, you have a situation where someone picks up the first stone and starts casting that first stone, and everything follows from that. And because of the mob mentality and just how everyone gets literally motivated to do or to follow suit whatever the first person would have done, you can't control the process. Sometimes citizens merely want to scare someone. Citizens merely want to apprehend someone and take that person to the police station, but emotions get out of hand and no one can really control the process. So there is literally no law, it becomes a lawless process where things can escalate very quickly, and the very same people who are literally trying to ensure that justice is seen to be done by taking the law into their own hands and bearing part of the responsibility to bring a perpetrator to book become the very people who would have committed even a worse crime sometimes than what the perpetrator would have committed. In the event, for instance, of the perpetrator having stolen someone's food or having robbed someone's house, then when that person ends up being killed, it means that the very same law-abiding community members become criminals overnight.
And like crime in general, this phenomenon, mob violence, is in all likelihood also being underreported.
Indeed, indeed. So in some communities where some of these issues do not end up in murder or in killing of someone, usually you don't hear much of it. Communities basically would then bring perpetrators to book. They will beat up the perpetrator. If the perpetrator does not report, then it means that the case will end up there. So most of it also is underreported, but it's really becoming a phenomena that is disturbing because of just how, for instance, people can be radicalized towards addressing crime in a community, but end up being criminals themselves.
That's what we're going to leave it for today. Annah Moyo-Kupeta, thanks very much for your time and insight.